Hello, I am Dr. Todd Lekan. I'm a philosophy professor and associate dean at the University of South Carolina, Lancaster, and I am coming to you today with the second presentation on the topic of disabilities and philosophy. I'm offering this presentation as part of the Undergraduate Research Club's virtual conference being run here out of University of South Carolina, Lancaster. Last time we just introduced some of the topics that philosophers talk about when they study disabilities from a moral and political point of view. And today I want to deepen our discussion a bit. We saw that it's not as easy to define what a disability is as it might appear to be at first glance. And I'm going to give you a couple of models to think about as we try to deepen our understanding of the nature of disabilities and its connection to moral and political topics. Before doing that, I think it would be useful to hear from a disabilities rights advocate. And so I'm going to do that right now by introducing you to Jillian Marcato as she visits the UN, the United Nations, to talk about the importance of conventions regarding human rights for people with disabilities. So let me share this with you.
Having a disability, I've accepted it, so it doesn't stop me from doing anything. My electric wheelchair are my legs. And living in a city like New York, I can catch the bus, the train, or a taxi now and get to anywhere I need to go. I am here at the UN to talk about something that's very, very important to me, which is women and girls who have disabilities. It's an honor and a privilege too, and show people that it's okay to be yourself and still do what you love.
In this hall, most of the international treaties and conventions have been adopted. Among them, CRPD. This is the largest human rights treaty ever. 177 states subscribe to it.
I think that it's very important, and everybody wants basic human rights.
This is our main goal.
Yeah.
To include people with disabilities in the implementation of
in the conversation. Nobody knows about disabilities as well as we do. So having these conferences and these conventions are crucially important to have a better world. Life is extremely beautiful, and we should live it to its full potential.
That is great. Can I borrow it for the conference?
Yes.
I'm about to meet the Secretary General, and we are going to talk about super important issues. So come with me. How is the UN promoting full inclusion for people with disabilities?
Well, first of all, to raise awareness, to put it in the agenda. Second, to actively promote the adoption of laws. And then to integrate these questions in the Sustainable Development Goals. The convention was a landmark moment, and every person with disability needs to make sure that they have access to full education, access to social protection, access to decent jobs.
And also it's really important, at least for me, to talk about women and girls who have disability and how important that is. So I just wanted to know your thoughts on that.
We need to make sure that women are not double victims. First, because being women,
Right.
They are victims of discrimination, and second, because being women with disability,
Right.
They are double victims of discrimination. So it is clear that this is a fundamental priority for us in our relations with member states, to be absolutely sure that in their national plans of implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, they take fully into account the rights of people with disability.
I'm so glad that, that I'm part of this, especially me myself having a disability. Sometimes we feel like we're left out. And, at the end of the day, we're all humans and we deserve to have equal rights.
We cannot afford to lose the contribution of 1 billion people to the development of the world.
If there's a message I want to say out there is to be vocal, talk. We're in a beautiful age of social media. And I think it's very important that if you have conversation next and you know it, you'll be at the UN talking about this.
Okay, so we saw there a nice video that expresses the way in which disabilities rights is on the agenda, both globally and also in the United States on a national level, and how it should be framed as a human rights issue, as something that brings together a group of people who sort of, no matter how much their disabilities may vary, suffer some common kinds of discrimination or suffer some common kinds of social exclusion. And certainly if you are a member of another marginalized group, such as being a woman, as the video pointed out, you are a potential double victim of social marginalization. So that video nicely presents the quest for rights as absolutely critical to understanding the perspective of people with disabilities. And I'm going to come back to this theme here in a second, particularly with respect to the social model of disabilities. So right now, I want to talk about these two models for understanding disabilities. One is the medical model and one is the social. These are two ways that theorists have used to try to understand what a disability is, and also then what our moral obligations might be as a society to people with disabilities. So let's talk about the medical model. The medical model says or asserts that disabilities are impairments, and those impairments are biological functions of individuals that have gone awry or gone wrong in some way due to underlying genetic conditions or disease or injury. This model tends to be individualist in the way that it frames disabilities. And by that, I mean, it sees disabilities as problems that an individual has. It sees it as an individual problem, as an individual medical problem, as a case, as it were. So like any kind of medical issue that you might go and see a doctor about, a disability is just a more maybe prolonged or protracted kind of example of some medical problem or medical issue. And so it is framed in that way. The medical model, obviously, then is cure-focused. Disabilities are problems that need to be cured by medical technologies and therapies, and the goal is essentially to restore individuals to normal function, or at least as close to normal as possible, right? So there's something about your underlying biological condition that has gone wrong or that is impaired, and it needs to be cured or fixed to the degree that you can cure or fix it. And to the degree that you can't, this model tends to frame disabled people as suffering some kind of biological deficit. Well, the model does have some good points, right? We have, at least many of us, a deep-seated intuition that disability is a medical problem, is sort of a problem about one's biological functions, whether it be the use of limbs or the ability to use sensory organs like eyesight or hearing. And the model frames disabilities as a matter of medical resources. And to the degree that it could like plug in to talk about rights, you could think of the medical model as encouraging us to think of disabilities as a topic for discussion under the umbrella of basic healthcare rights to basic healthcare resources, and something that an individual patient deserves. The model, though, does seem to leave some important aspects of the experience of being disabled off to the side, or not. It doesn't really highlight them. So it does seem to ignore the whole domain of social prejudices against people with disabilities. So some would say that a medical model fosters what you might call a curing mentality that itself might contribute to prejudice against people with disabilities. There's something wrong with the disabled person which needs to be fixed or cured. And if you can't fix or cure such a person, they are abnormal, or they are, in some ways not fully attaining human potential. This model then might ignore our need to attend to social obligations we have to the group of people with disabilities, right? So Jillian Mercado is advocating on behalf of a group of people, which she would say that we, globally even, have moral obligations to, and who need basic respect, and who need to have certain basic rights guaranteed to them, which any person should expect is their due. This model then leads us to the social model of disabilities. And that model says that it's really social norms, practices, and institutions that disable people. So you've got, various kinds of impairments, right? Like you can't use your ears, you can't hear, you can't see, maybe you can't walk. But those impairments are not necessarily inherently disabling conditions. It's rather those impairments coupled with social environments that themselves are based on widespread social prejudice that makes those impairments disabling. Maybe a way to put this bluntly would be society disables, right? It's social structures based on prejudice that lead an impairment, or that cause an impairment to become disabling. So it's the fact that you don't have wheelchair ramps that make the impairment of not being able to walk disabling. It's the fact that you don't have people trained in sign language, and you don't have social acceptance of sign language that makes deafness disabling. And this approach is very much a civil rights focused approach. Disability is conceived of as a social problem that needs to be addressed through policy and law and social institutions like the UN Convention and like the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, the social model has some pros and some cons, like the medical model. And I am going to address those in greater detail in my next talk. So I do ask you to tune in for the third and final part of this series of talks on philosophy and disabilities. And I will see you next time.